Hey everybody, here to let you know that due to popular demand, Imperial Yeast has decided to extend the availability of their latest seasonal strain, A37 Pog, through September of 2020. The folks I know who have used this stuff absolutely love it. So what is it? A37 Pog is a single Kveik isolate known to produce tons of guava, passion fruit, pineapple, and orange aromas, reminiscent of the classic juice blend. Like all Kveik strains, it is highly versatile and can be fermented on the warmer end of the spectrum to produce tropical aromas, or you can ferment it cooler to produce beers with cleaner ester profiles. Grab yourself some A37 Pog before it's too late, and make sure to check out all Imperial Yeast has to offer at imperialyeast.com. The most common source of fermentable sugar when brewing a batch of beer is, of course, barley malt, which there are enough varieties of to allow for brewing a bunch of different styles, thankfully. It's amazing stuff, as any brewer will attest. However, it is not the only grain one can use to make beer. In fact, there's evidence of people brewing with oats as far back as, I believe, the 1500s, though these days it's associated with styles like Oatmeal Stout and, of course, New England IPA. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and the focus of today's episode isn't just on the use of oats in brewing, but the way in which they can be treated prior to being used.
Yeah, this one is going to be about toasted oats specifically. So usually flaked oats, we see a ton of use in a lot of different styles. And like you've said, like oats themselves have been used for a very, very long time. But toasted oats are something that, I don't see tons and tons of resources on, but it's something every now and then that comes up or creeps up as a way either to maybe add some complexity or toasted character to an imperial stout, or all the way to, making sure that your oatmeal stout has some oatmeal and rich cookie like flavors. Mm-hmm. So it's, it's something that I think we definitely is worth exploring more. Just the home toasting and the home, it adds a little bit to the terroir, right? The own personal touch to it. So I'm really excited to talk about it. And it's something that I definitely was really excited to do for the experiment. It was a blast, but it's also something it's always been hearsay. It's always been just things I've come across on forums, never anything that I have researched in any way or anything that I've seen serious quote unquote materials out there for.
Right. Yeah. I like what you were saying. It adds another DIY component to the brewing process. And, from pretty early on in my brewing life, the idea of using oats was really appealing to me, admittedly, because I kind of associated it with things like oatmeal cookies and granola, which I absolutely love. Over the years, I've used oats quite a bit, though I've only ever toasted them once. I'm looking forward to chatting about that experience with you, Matt, as well as the impact using toasted oats is said to have on beer and the results of your experiment on the topic. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up in September is Haas's associate sensory scientist, Jeff Daly, who was on our recent episode about Lupamax hops, and his colleague, Alejandro Gonzalez, the brewing solutions specialist at Haas. These dudes know their hops. If you love hops, you're going to want to be a part of this event. Just make sure that you make your pledge at patreon.com/Brewlosophy no later than September 25th, 2020 to be a part of it. All past sessions with folks like John Kimmich from The Alchemist, author Scott Janish from Sapwood Cellars, and many more are stored on our private Facebook page, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Again, that's patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd really appreciate it. We've been seeing a lot of those come through and want to thank all the people who are leaving us such kind words. All right, feedback this week is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who specialize in tri-clover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique items for home and craft brewers, including high-quality stainless fittings at great prices with super fast shipping. Learn more at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. Listener Jason L. from Wisconsin had feedback on our Brews Views episode on Going Pro. So this was a while back. Jason says, I especially enjoyed listening to Malcolm talk about his time at Miller Coors and Fatheads. I appreciate it when people who have worked in the brewing industry talk about breweries as real for-profit businesses. I think homebrewers sometimes have this romanticized image of what it means to go pro. Oddly enough, even referring to opening a small business as, quote, going pro makes it sound like homebrewers are amateur athletes just waiting to get drafted into the big leagues. Jeez. Many also have this perspective that employees of large macro breweries aren't real brewers or don't make real beer. The reality couldn't be further from the truth. They haven't been duping millions of people into buying their products for decades. They make a product people want, and they do it exceptionally well. Another thing I think often gets overlooked is non-brewing positions at breweries. Let's see, mid to large size breweries all have supply chains, IT departments, HR departments, marketing, sales, etc. You can get a job in a brewery and still sit in the air conditioning. I was very close to doing this myself recently. If you're passionate about brewing, but your skills are in other areas, this might be the path for you. The best jobs I've ever had were applying my expertise to help grow a company that did something I was passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on. Like I think I agree with a lot, is like, you know, utilizing your skill set and being in an area you're passionate about. I definitely agree that a lot of homebrewers I know romanticize the idea of working in a brewery or romanticize the idea of owning a brewery. And I mean, that's why we see a lot of breweries fail, right? Not necessarily because they're homebrewers specifically, but because there's a lot more to a brewery than making. I think I've always seen like owning a brewery is like 98%, or it's like 2% making beer, 98% everything else. Like you're running a business.
Right.
And definitely, I do think that romanticized idea exists. And I know a lot of home brewers who make better beer than professional brewers. I know professional brewers who unfortunately make very bad beer. And that is just like the situation, because the barrier to entry for beer is money. Like the barrier to entry to opening a brewery is having the money to do so.
To do it right. Exactly.
There is no inherent quality control process in the fact like, oh, I'm a pro brewer. It's like, hey, good for you, but like, are you making good beer?
Yeah.
And I mean, but also like to say a lot of home brewers make bad beer as well, and a lot of brewers make exceptional beer, and that's just the way it is. Like there's a craft aspect to it that it also is it can be difficult at a professional scale. Like the professional scale of making beer, it isn't just like, hey, you make really good beer on your 5 gallon, so now you're going to make incredible beer on your 5 barrel, 7 barrel, and that's a small system, right? Yeah. So I'm 100% in agreement with it. I love when people talk about the difficulties and the pitfalls of breweries, because I've always had my own romanticized idea, like, oh, wouldn't this be great? But then I like either do the math or I like think about the days. I'm like, actually, probably not. Like I've worked in breweries, and it's and mostly just like in packaging lines and like looking at like quality control stuff. And I mean, it's hard. Like it's hundreds of degrees. It's not hundreds of degrees. It's incredibly hot during the summer, which is really difficult. It's a lot. It's a lot of manual labor, which is fine.
It's hard work.
There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's very hard, and it's a business. Like
right.
It's a very difficult business. There's a huge supply chain. It's hard to run and manage. So kudos to people who can do it, and to the people who love it, and the people who are able to do so, because I'm thankful that I get to like go to local breweries and like have a couple of beers and do that, which wouldn't be possible without him. But 100% spot on comment. I'm in 100% agreement with it.
Yeah. All I'm thinking now is if we could carve out some space for a psychologist in a brewery. You know, I know a lot of brewers, and they could probably use a little help. I don't know.
I honestly, man, like that kind of stuff. Industrial design is a really big field. And there's reasons that spaces are designed in such a way. And but I honestly I do think, like, actually, good question for you is like maybe a follow up. Like, if you personally, I think that if any position needs to be implemented within breweries more frequently, it's dedicated quality control.
Oh,
like I do think that we need people who are dedicated to working on making sure that, like, just detection of off flavors, process review, process streamlining and optimization, those kinds of things, like, should probably be a dedicated position. It's someone in a brewery who does that, and not just the brewer who's has to carry every single position and do absolutely everything for $30,000 a year. And it's, you know what I mean? So, but that's personal opinion. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And so, something I really value is honesty. And oddly, I feel like it's easy for those of us with any amount of public exposure to, I guess, I play it safe by not always being totally truthful and transparent. One thing I've always strived for with Brewlosophy is just to keep things as real as possible. Not really worry about maintaining the expected appearance, but just being us. And I agree that Malcolm sharing his experience on that episode was really cool. So thanks for the feedback, Jason. We actually
have a few more Going Pro episodes planned for the future that offer different perspectives from people who made the step to go pro in their different capacities. I think people are really going to dig that. All right, if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. A few years ago, my family headed up to Santa Rosa for a little weekend vacation with some friends of ours, and very high on the list of things to do, obviously, was visit Russian River Brewing Company, which is in downtown Santa Rosa. At the time, all I really knew them for was Pliny the Elder and their lineup of amazing sour beer. My buddy Chris and I ended up spending 4 hours on the patio there, during which we sampled pretty much everything they had on tap. One of the beers that and that's a lot of beer, by the way. One of the beers that I took a whole pint of was STS Pils, which is a Keller Pils that I was absolutely blown away by. You expect Pliny the Elder Brewery to make awesome hoppy beer, but their lager was fantastic. Up until recently, the only way I was able to get STS Pils was either by driving all the way to Santa Rosa or having a buddy who did that bring some back for me. But now that they distribute in my area, I have ample access, which is wonderful. Well, I recently picked up a bottle to share with my friends.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim. No R2. Tim.
This smells like weed.
How do you know?
Allegedly. Well, it's good. Doesn't taste anything like it smells. Very smooth.
Yeah, it usually, from what I've heard, it usually is.
Just drink your beer.
Is it beer or is it weed?
It's beer.
All right. Oh, that's good. That's good.
It's good.
Is there weed in here?
No.
This beer is better than Marshall. No, it's really good. It's really good. Timmy, it's really good. What is it, though? We're learned men.
Not very clear.
That's not.
But it's good. Again, I don't know what it is. Kind of like Pine Sol a little bit, though.
I was worried. I didn't want to be made to look like a fool. But now that I realize it, let's be made to look like fools. This is a FPA. It's a FPA. And it's got a little bit of the bufu on the FPA. I don't care if I'm wrong. Cheers to you, Timmy. Let's put it down because it's delicious.
All right.
Whoever made this, it's delicious.
It's very good.
Well, that's good, dude.
Not bad.
It's good.
Probably, what do you give it?
I'm going to break from the Jersey Tims.
What are you going to do?
Marshalls.
Oh.
If I were Marshall, I would give it. Ooh, this is so difficult. I give this out of 10 Marshalls. I give this 6 Marshalls.
I'm going to give it a solid 7.
Weed? I promise you this beer was not skunked. It's in a brown bottle. It was kept in a cooler. It was I believe it was 2 weeks old at the time that the guys did the review. I do pick up a pretty noticeable noble hop character in STS Pils, but I don't, maybe it could be misinterpreted as weed-like, but I didn't pick it up that way. I absolutely loved it, and I would give STS Pils a solid 9 Marshalls. It's one of my favorites out there. So, Matt, you ever try STS?
No, I'm not familiar with it, and I was actually going to ask you about, like, is it supposed to be a little bit of a dank character or a weed character to it in that, but I guess not, and it might just be that confusion with a fresh noble hop character.
I guess,
which
yeah.
I've never really associated as, like, weed-like or
Me
dank,
either,
but,
yeah.
but there it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it sounds fantastic, and I am in no way surprised that Russian River does does good lagers, especially because, like, given their hoppy beers, like, they better have a pretty tight cold side process. So,
they do.
I'd love to have I could go for a Pilsner right now. I'm not drinking much right now at the moment, but a nice lager would be fantastic in this hot Illinois weather that we've been having.
Yeah. There are. I love seeing these craft breweries doing more and more Pilsners and lagers, and Russian River. I mean, what do you expect? They're one of the best breweries out there. So fantastic beer, STS Pils. If you get the opportunity to drink some, do it. All right, if you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage you feel like sending in, reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. We got to get to a quick break, give some love to our sponsors. We'll be right back after these messages. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. It wasn't too long after I started brewing that I was introduced to the idea of using oats in place of a portion of barley malt. I was still using extract and was interested in brewing a tasty low ABV dark beer, so the dude at the homebrew shop, his name was Mars, suggested an oatmeal stout and hooked me up with some flaked oats for steeping. Since then, I've used hundreds of pounds of oats in various styles. Currently, oats are perhaps most associated with New England IPA, at least that's what I think of nowadays, but their use in brewing actually spans many centuries.
Yeah, they have been used for a really long time, because if there's anything we can say is true of people, which I think I've said this before, is that societies learn how to make alcohol, and we do it pretty much with anything we find on hand, right? Yep. And that's why we see a lot like old recipes with tons of molasses and old recipe. It's why we have chicha, which is like chewed corn.
That's right.
We learn to make alcohol as a society, and I'm going to draw right now, especially in the historical aspect, on our good friend Chino, who gave actually a presentation titled Brewing with Oats. Chino talks a bit about just the use of oats having evidence as far back as like 400 before Common Era. So really, really long time ago. But there's definitely more concrete examples of this happening. A style called a style of beer brewed at the monastery of St. Gallen or Galen in Switzerland of 830 Common Era. And that's a beer style called Coventus, which is actually the last runnings of other beer mixed with an oat wort and then fermented. So, and again, this is something like it's very high. It's higher in calories. It was more like a common beer, like a table beer. So just lower in alcohol in general. Yeah. And that's all like the far back things. And I, again, highly recommend Chino's presentation. But like you mentioned, Marshall, we know definitely that oats were used, maybe not flaked oats necessarily, but oats were used very popular in Scotland in like the mid 1700s. And then definitely seen in English brewing as well. And so it's similar to our other discussions. Like people learn to make alcohol. We've been whatever we've got on hand, wheat, oat, barley, like all of it ends up being something that we can turn into a fermentable.
Yeah. Now, okay. So comparing oats to, or thinking of oats next to barley, what are some of the similarities and some of the differences? My understanding is that oats can be malted in the same way that barley can, but there are obviously some distinct differences between these two cereal grains.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely, like malted oats are out there for sure. We see flaked oats a lot, but like oats have a much higher husk content. So especially like when you see malted oats and stuff, like they are typically don't have like the same lautering problems that like flaked oats do. Mm-hmm. But really when we see people using these oats in beer, especially compared to barley, is that they're they're most often not malted in any way. Like we almost always see flaked oats. And so a slight oat characteristic is typical from them, and typically, used in low percentages, which is pretty much anything under 15%, which wouldn't be low for anything else, but that's just how neutral oats tend to be. But under that percentage, like flaked oats just contribute, they're higher in beta glucan content. So like they are going to contribute, or typically the reason we would use them is like they're going to contribute more viscosity to the mouthfeel of the beer. They're going to have a really, really low impact, potentially just a slight nutty characteristic on the aroma, like maybe a little slight oat, but again, like very, very neutral, and just increase body a little bit. But for the most part, they're really, they're not going to contribute as much to just, especially like flaked oats, they're not going to contribute as much to the sugar content. They're really used just for that beta glucan content. Typically, they're going to contribute the beer viscosity.
Right, and that beta glucan content, like you said, is a body / mouthfeel thing. We've all experienced, if you use, especially where I experience the most beta glucan impact, and there will be future shows on this as well, is using rye. Oats for me, one of the things, again, in the earlier days, one of the things was you get a oatmeal flavor, which, okay, that makes sense. But then it also contributes to things like foam retention, right? Because of the protein content. This is at least the stuff that I was told. Now, just to hit on it one more time, you mentioned there's malted oats, but then I think probably the most popular form of oats in brewing is flaked oats. And the way that the oats are prepared is pretty important in how you have to use them in your when you're brewing. Now, just correct me if I'm wrong on this, Matt. Malted oats, the most popular, I guess, way to get those is golden naked oats, right? My understanding is that golden naked oats are just malted oats, right?
That would be the common one that we see, right? There's like some specialty malt, like smaller maltsters out there who are doing like some specialty things that I think are really cool with oats. But yeah, that would be like the most common malted oat.
Okay. I've never used golden naked oats. How weird is that? A grain that I've never touched before. I want to get my hands on some because I've heard good things, but
I've never used it either, but I will say like there is oat malt for sure. Like there's oat malts out there, and there are people who are doing like a darker oat malt, like almost like trying to make not like a roasted barley necessarily, but just different flavors of these oat malts. Like it's starting to see a little more popularity as some more small maltsters are popping up, and I'm really excited to try those. Like I think that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, me too. Now flaked oats. Let's just, before we move into talking about toasting and how you go about doing it, because there are some pretty specific things you want to make sure you do when you toast your own oats. Flaked oats they're neat, and there's a lot of flaked grains out there. You can buy flaked barley, you can get flaked oats, you can get flaked rye, flaked rice. What does the flaking process do, or maybe even how is it done? Because it is pretty interesting, I think.
So the way that typically works is that pieces of oat are essentially rolled so that they go through a drying process. They're steamed. They are flattened, and like they go through, basically they are pre-gelatinized. So and I know we've talked about that before on the show, but when you have oats, they need to go, and I mean pretty much anything, like a starch, like you need to go through a gelatinization process in order for those starches to be fermentable, or not fermentable, but in order to like be able to take advantage of those starches within the grain, you need to be gelatinized. So instead of doing some kind of a cereal rest, we will use flaked oats that are pre-gelatinized, and those are typically you'll find like either the quick oats, or if you just get brewing oats, typically like a flaked oats is going to be pre-gelatinized. Right. But once they are steamed, flattened, they are ready to be used in like wide variety of goods, really popular, and they are usually they're dehusked when they go through that process. So when you hear like rolled oats, typically rolled oats are oats that have been dehusked, steamed, and then flattened. Right. And those rolled oats, especially like we mentioned earlier, oats actually have a higher grain or a higher husk ratio that compared to barley. So an oat malt won't necessarily have those same lautering problems. But when we talk about like the cons of using flaked oats, especially large percentages of flaked oats, one of them actually, Marshall, that you mentioned is like at like above 10%. And this is actually Scott Janish has a really, really exceptional, as always, he has an exceptional article on something. Yeah. But Scott has this article that is out, and I also highly recommend, which I think it's called A Case for Brewing with Oats, but he published it a while ago.
Excellent.
Yeah, great article. He actually references quite a bit some of the research that suggests that anything over 10% usage flaked oats is going to, or of unmalted oats is going to start to contribute detrimental compounds to head retention.
Yeah.
And I think that is from impact of various levels of unmalted oats on the quality of mashes, worts, and beers by Schnittenbaumer. I'm not going to be I think it's Schnittenbaumer et al. But that's in Scott's article. Highly recommend it. But then another is that the lautering problem, right? If you use a lot of flaked oats, it's going to, because those husks have been removed, you're going to have lautering difficulties. It's going to gum up the mash, right? That's not a problem for people who are typically using a brew bag or something like that, but definitely, or it can also be solved with rice hulls, but it is definitely a problem outside for the oats that have been flaked.
Right. Something to keep in mind if you're going to do high oats and you're using a more of a traditional brewing brewing regime where you're not, brewing a bag or brewing a basket. Now, because I like really dumbed down explanations, the flaking the flaking process essentially makes the oats able to be used in beer without malting, right? So that's when you flake a cereal grain, what you're doing is it's going through that hot steaming process before being rolled out, and so that makes it accessible to the yeast for the yeast to convert, or the mash to convert, and then the yeast to ultimately ferment that. So flaking is great. That's why I think it's so common. It's so commonly used in brewing. Now, my understanding is that oats are contribute about the same amount of fermentable sugars as barley, maybe a tad less, but it's not like you're having a huge hit when you swap out a portion of barley for oats, right?
Yeah, they are about the same gravity contribution. It's somewhere in the ballpark of 32 ppg, but points per gallon. But
points per pound per gallon.
Points per pound per gallon. Yep. And they are they're about the same. You definitely can't swap them out one for one, right? We can't just swap out a bunch of flaked oats for barley, but absolutely they definitely. I mean, part of that is due to diastatic power and stuff like that.
Right,
but
right,
yes,
right.
Definitely, yeah. But definitely, they do contribute significant gravity points, at least in relation to malt.
Yeah. So the reason I say that is because in my own experience, again, I've used oats quite a bit over the years, and usually what I'll do is I have a weird way. We should do an experience show on recipe design and how we go about doing it. But usually what I do is I start off with I just put in 12 pounds of pale two row, and then from there I'll swap out portions of that with other malts and grains. And when I do flaked oats, it typically doesn't change the expected OG very much. That's the reason I come to that. Now let's get to the meat of the matter here and toasting oats, because as we know, you take pale two row barley malt, and you can toast it to various degrees and get so many different flavors and characteristics out of barley malt. Well, you can kind of do the same with toasted oats or with flaked oats as well. And we both have experience doing that. When you toast oats, first off, Matt, what is your aim? What are you hoping to get out of it? And then how do you do it? Because I know that there's you don't want to burn them, but you want to do it right. So.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So honestly, before this experiment, I'd never done it. When we did the experiment, this was my first time going for it, especially just because I'd seen it so frequently that when you toast oats, just have them toasted yourself, that you are going to contribute more and richer, nutty, biscuity characteristics from those oats instead of just a neutral, maybe somewhat muted oatmeal character. And that also you're going to get a more, it's almost a cookie-like kind of character from these toasted oats, right? So basically when you go through, they get darker, you go through the Maillard reaction, and when those sugars and Maillard reaction is when sugars and amino acids interact. It's when things get when you toast something, right? When it gets darker,
nice and toasty and good.
Exactly. And I use that color change as sort of a benchmark for how toasted these oats are and how much flavor change there's potentially be. But going through that Maillard reaction is what causes that nutty, toasty character. And I know some people actually who do toasted oats for oatmeal. and we'll have like a toasted oat oatmeal, and it's supposed to be just like a little richer, a little nuttier, more biscuit characters,
Sounds
and a little
good.
bit of like cookie like. Yeah, it does sound good, doesn't it? Should have done that as like a side portion of this
Yeah. Take a handful.
But that's definitely like, and people say that same contribution ends up in beers. So especially oatmeal stouts, brown ales, things that might potentially benefit from that biscuity, nutty character. Toasting your oats is an option. Now, I do this. I followed the process that was put together and detailed out by Derek Springer, who you know, Marshall, but over on his blog, Five Blades Brewing, he has an excellent article that kind of walks through the toasted oats process.
Yeah.
And I use that just to make sure I was in the right place, because I know Derek did a lot of research for that article, and it's pretty straightforward and simple. But I did have some like pitfalls that I found out through the process. Setting the oven to 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 149 C, get it preheated, lining a baking sheet with some parchment paper, and then just spreading out the oats evenly. I used like the Quaker Instant Oats because they're pre-gelatinized. This is one of my pitfalls. I highly recommend that oat layer being a bit thinner. If the oat layer is too thick, it takes so much longer to get a consistent toast on that batch, because you are effectively popping them in the oven, and then every 15 minutes, take the oats out, stir them, level them out again, and then put them back in. And you rinse and repeat this process until they are at your desired toast level.
Right.
I think Derek had reported it taking like 45 minutes to an hour with his, and I had so many oats in mine, I think it took closer to 2 hours for me to be done.
To get to that color, the color you were looking for.
Exactly. To
Yeah.
get to that significant color change, which again, like maybe a small pro tip, keep on hand some of the untoasted oats just around so that you can do a quick color comparison.
Yes.
If you're like me and you're colorblind, or you just have or you have a terrible memory for color, having a comparison is super helpful. But again, like having a thin oat layer is super useful. Or if you have 3 hours to do it, then do it. Like you can do as much as you want, but just make sure you're going to commit that time.
Yeah.
And that your house is going to smell really richly like oat cookies, basically. It's going to be, but also a little bit acrid in my experience. Like there was like kind of an acrid character to it as well.
Yeah. Okay. So story time. Many years ago, my local homebrew club ran a competition where all of the participants had to submit beers of the same exact style. It was a lot of fun. And in this particular quarter, it was English mild. How exciting was that, by the way?
By the way, amazing style.
Amazing style. Well,
underrepresented. So good.
so many British beers. Wanting to do something to make mine stand out from the crowd, because you're brewing for competition, I decided not only to swap out a portion of the barley malt with flaked oats, but to toast those oats ahead of time. My hope was that it would add some complimentary, like cookie-like character to this beer. Now, like you, I followed Derek's, his how-to on his blog, Five Blades Brewing. A couple weeks before brewing the beer, I toasted the oats in my oven using a pretty, the approach is very simple. Basically what you did, Matt. And it did make my house smell good, but also I completely agree. There was this like acrid, I don't know. It's hard to explain. It was almost like smelling acid almost.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. It's not burnt. Like it's definitely not that, but it is like a bit of an acrid character to it. And honestly, that's actually, you mentioned that you did it like a couple of weeks before. Did you do the whole storm in a paper bag bit?
I sure did. I wanted to bring that up.
And so that's the theory, right? Is that due to the like volatile oils are present in freshly toasted oats, and that using them immediately, like if you don't wait and like store them in a paper bag and give time for those volatile oils to dissipate, that you could potentially be contributing those volatile oils into your beer. Like if you took them out of the oven and then immediately started mashing.
Yeah.
And that's something I think would be a cool a follow-up experiment to this. I would love to see like, let's do that again. And see like freshly toasted versus like toasted like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I ended up, I was talking with Chino during the like recipe selection for this, and I can talk about that later, but I kind of went back and forth on, do I do it immediately? Do I wait the 3 weeks? Ended up waiting the 3 weeks just because I don't know necessarily if those oils would be present or would have time to dissipate in the beer. Cause Derek does mention that he's done it with like, I waited like 3 days and he didn't have a problem.
Okay.
But I didn't want it to come back in the experiment. Like, both of these taste acrid. Like there's a or that being the thing that gives one of them away. Right. That the acrid character. So I think that'd be a fun one for the future.
Yeah. And what's So when you're toasting your oats, you're going to smell this. I mean, it is so obvious. I mean, I thought it was good. My wife, not so much. In fact, she made me promise not to use our kitchen for that ever again. It was like the entire house smelled like not burnt, but this acrid oat thing
No, it's like oil. It smells like oil.
Yeah. And we have a whole house fan. They're common in where we live. And we had to open up the windows, turn the fan on, suck all that air out. I mean, it was pretty strong. It was pungent stuff. So anyway, the beer came out tasting really good and ended up scoring, I think, second place in the competition out of like 14, 15 people. So, I was convinced then that toasting those oats contributed these positive qualities to the beer. I can't say for sure if it really did. An English mild is one of those styles where, maybe it's not traditionally used. Toasted oats aren't traditionally used in it, but I feel like it is a very complementary flavor to add to styles like brown ale, most British beers, those things that you want a richer malt complexity that's maybe a little bit different than what you would get from barley.
Yeah, after having the brown ales that I made for this, I wouldn't hesitate necessarily to try this out in like a Scottish heavy or a wee heavy, maybe an English barley wine. Obviously, porters, stouts, brown ales, those things all come to mind. And again, we see oats used in a pretty wide. We see a ton of them. Obviously, Nipa is the new style that's super high end. Don't know if it would be super as appropriate there. Maybe
toasted.
Exactly, toasted oats. But in oatmeal stout, of course, we know that for sure. But also, there's IPAs with a decent percentage of flaked oats in them, and I'd just be interested to see how it plays in those. But I would probably lean more into, if I had to make some kind of an argument, I would lean more into it being appropriate for things like Scottish heavy, English mild is definitely up there, porters, all that stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you were interested to test it out for yourself, and that's exactly what you did. Results from a fascinating experiment after this short break. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAB experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. Given my experience using toasted oats in an English mild that ended up tasting quite good and scoring well in competition, I was pretty confident it had a noticeable and, in this case, positive impact. Matt, you were interested to see for yourself how toasting oats affects beer, and you put it to the test.
I did. And like we said before, I ended up just going with a brown ale recipe. I was actually originally going to do an oatmeal stout because that's kind of the first thing I think of when I think of an oatmeal recipe. But I got some excellent feedback from Chino, and I was kind of like gut checking myself on best practices, styles, all that stuff, and ended up, after his advice and feedback, landing on a brown ale that's using like a pretty high percentage of flaked oats, where it might just be more noticeable as opposed to like an oatmeal stout where the roasted characters and all that stuff might contribute to the like being able to not pick it up or something like that.
Yeah, cover it up or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. So after going through that, I landed on this brown ale recipe that is about 65% pale ESB pale malt. Just a malt from Gambrinus, pretty good, just fantastic malt. I really enjoy it. About 5.5% brown malt, which is growing on me as a malt recently. I was for some reason like super opposed in the history of my brewing, but like now it's fantastic. I think my taster is changing. But 5.5% C120, about 3% pale chocolate malt, and then a whopping 21% flaked oats. And one of these batches, like we've said, was just straight flaked oats. It was just like Quaker's instant oats that I had purchased from the store. And then the other had the toasted oats that had been toasted in the oven for like 2 hours at that 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 100 or 300 degrees Fahrenheit and 149 degrees C. And both, then again, like I put both the toasted oats and the not toasted oats in independent paper bags. I didn't want it to come back like, well, one of these was stored in a sealed container and one of these was in a paper bag for 3 weeks. So they were both in a paper bag for 3 weeks. So on brew day, filled the systems with water, ended up mashing it about 152 degrees Fahrenheit or 67 C for 60 minutes, did a pretty straightforward boil for 60 minutes, used about 10 grams of Magnum at 60 minutes just for bittering, and then 19 grams of EKG at 15. And then after the boil, chilled both worts, ended up with an identical original gravity of about 1050. So right where I wanted to be for the beer. Racked them both to sanitized fermenting kegs and did a direct pour of the Imperial Yeast A09 Pub, which I believe is the Fuller strain. And then fermented those at 65 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 C for about 2 weeks before taking hydrometer measurements and found that both of them were about 1009 for the final gravity.
Yeah, perfect.
Pressure transferred those beers into serving kegs, burst carbonated, and I had them conditioning for about 2 weeks before they were evaluated by myself. Actually, this was one of our first COVID experiments that unfortunately I had made prior to being confined to my home. So I'd like full intention of doing this with a larger group, doing it with a bunch of people, but unfortunately, just before I was ready to serve it, I got locked away.
Now,
so it's just me.
A comment on our for those of you who listen to, we just put this survey out, by the way, and the data's coming in. There's quite a few people who listen to the podcast who don't actually read the articles on the website, which I'm glad you're able to digest this information some other way. But we do, during the whole COVID thing, we've had to revert to or resort to doing our own evaluations, which is admittedly, in my opinion, kind of stupid, but it's the best we've got. So the way that we do this, just to get it out, so people understand how we do, or what the effort that we put into keeping ourselves as least biased as possible, is we have 4 cups. 2 cups are marked on the bottom, right? So they're all the same color cups. 2 are marked. Each set of cups gets filled to the same level with the different beers. So you've got 2 beers in one, or 1 beer in 2 cups, the other beer in the other 2 cups. And then we randomize those and select 3 of them and try to find the odd one out in those 3. So it's not perfect, but it is better than not having brewing content, in our opinion, and that's why we do it this way. We are very excited to get back to normal data collection as soon as possible, but that is the way we do it. We go through a series of 10 triangle test attempts. So Matt, in your 10 attempts, how many times were you able to identify the odd beer out?
So out of those 10, I was able to identify it 7 times, which is the exact amount of times we would need to say for me to be able to reliably distinguish those brown ales from one another, from one toasted with made with toasted oats versus one made with not toasted oats. That's 7 times.
So that is 7 out of 10 times when you're sitting down over 45 minutes and doing these triangle tests. That's good odds that these beers are characteristically different. Now, is it a stout versus a pilsner? No.
Yeah, it wasn't 10 for 10. Like, that's something
Right.
that stands out to me, is that, like, I definitely, honestly, like, having both of them and then doing it, because of course this was semi-blind, right?
Yeah.
I know the variable, I know these beers, and then I enjoyed both beers a lot, but having them like fully cited, right? Like knowing which keg was which, I did have I felt like I had a slight preference for the non-toasted oats version. I thought it was cleaner. I thought it was like a more drinkable beer. I thought the toasted oats version was good, but it was like kind of a cookie-like character to it. It wasn't unpleasant. It's just like wasn't what I wanted in this brown ale.
Yeah.
But then like sitting down to do the experiment, 7 for 10, it's not. Like saying 7 for 10 is not as different as saying I have a clear preference for one of these. Because if I had a clear preference, I should probably be 10 for 10. Like I would hope, right? But it's, again, like palate fatigue, all that stuff, like it goes into it. But, and you know, my preference was what my preference was for those when they were cited. But yeah, 7 for 10, I was kind of surprised by that, to be honest.
Well, and you mentioned that both batches were good. I mean, we dig into the subjectivity of preference, right? If we're forced to choose which one to drink, you would choose the non-toasted one, but you enjoyed both of them just fine. It's not like you would turn the toasted oats version away.
No, I thought it was fine. I thought it was good. And I think that there would be beers that I would actually prefer that cookie-like character to it. It's just like that specific brown ale. I just preferred the one that was cleaner and I thought more drinkable.
Did you? So we keep using the cookie-like descriptor. Is that really what you, because again, we're biased, you know what to expect. Yeah. Oftentimes our expectations guide our perceptions.
Oh yeah.
Is that what you would say? Because I'm referring back to the only beer I ever put toasted oats in before was this English mild. And that is what I perceived as well. It was like oatmeal cookies and I loved it in the mild, you know?
I don't know. So here's the thing. I don't think if you like had an oatmeal cookie and then you had had that brown ale that you would think, oh yeah, these taste like one another. I think having the brown ale is like, there are characteristics that are reminiscent of an oatmeal cookie,
sure.
which is just, I think the toasted oats.
Yeah.
I think it's that specific character. Like it's not, I don't think cookie-like in regards to it being overly sweet.
Right.
I don't think cookie-like in terms of it being like not a pastry beer. Like it's not like a dessert-like beer because of these toasted oats. But I think just the toasted oat characteristic is reminiscent of the toasted oats and cookies.
Yeah, it gives the impression of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I do think that's accurate though. Like it was more definitely like some nutty characteristic to it. I wouldn't quite say maybe biscuity. I wouldn't say biscuity. I would more say that cookie-like or just like the toasted oat character.
Yeah,
like it's specifically, it tastes like toasted oats, which is what the cookie tastes like.
Well, did you notice any differences in head retention, in color of the head, of anything in appearance?
These beers looked exactly the same. There was some lighting problems in my, like there's always lighting problems in my photos.
Yeah, we are not photographers professionally, that's for sure. Yeah.
Malcolm kind of is. I love his beer photos. He always does I've like asked him for advice before. Like it's my photos are not great, but I had no differences in head retention, no differences in the appearance of the head or the quality of the head, no difference in the color of the beer or the clarity or anything like that. It was really just in the, not even as much in the aroma. It was more so just in the flavor of this beer that I saw the primary difference.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. And after this experience for you, having compared flaked oats, non-toasted to toasted, what are your thoughts now about, are you going to be toasting oats again in the future? And if you do, or if you were to, is there specific styles now, again, based on your experience here, that you would use them in over others?
Yeah, I think that based on this, I would definitely toast oats again, but I would probably do so I would start trying it in a barley wine, start trying it in an imperial stout or an oatmeal stout. I would lean more into those styles. I'd probably use less. I probably wouldn't use the 20% that I did. I'd probably have like reduce it a little bit to like 15% maybe.
Sure.
And just use a little bit less and start going there as like a guiding principle and then tweak that recipe based on it. But honestly, like for a brown ale, I'm going to use flaked oats. I use a bunch of flaked oats. Like you said earlier, I'm kind of interested in like flaked. I use a lot of flaked rye as well. And I would like to see like toasted flaked rye, I think might be fun, just to see what that contributes and what that's like. But as far as like the toasted flaked oats specifically, I would lean into porters, English barley wines,
Sure.
brown ales, oatmeal stout, or not the brown ales, but the oatmeal stouts.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. There's this richness contributed by the toasting of flaked oats, and I picked it up in my English mild as well. So I had mentioned earlier that my main reason for toasting the oats that I put into this English mild was that I wanted it to stand out to the judges, and that is when you're competing. That's a common recommendation. You want that beer to be almost a caricature of the style that you're aiming, because you want it to be different enough for the judges to go, huh, I noticed that one, right?
Yeah, the most imperial stouty imperial stout.
Yeah,
right? Like that's, I think Chris Colby has a really good article on that actually. Like it's just standing out in competition. It's hard. It's hard to do.
Exactly. And so thinking back, this was a long time ago, but thinking back on that beer, I recall sitting in the garage and having, pulling pints of it off for the guys and talking about it. And some of my judge friends were over saying, if you're judging it next to other beers, I could see how this would stand out. But there was this richness to it that made it less crushable, if you will. You're not going to sit and pound pint after pint like you typically would with a cleaner English mild. And so there, to me, especially seeing that you were able to distinguish these beers, a brown ale even made with toasted oats, I can't say that I'm going to be, well, my wife, first off, won't let me toast oats in the house anymore. So there's that barrier. But at the same time, I'm not sure there's not many styles that I could see myself using it in. Because that richness is not something that I typically go for. Now, if I'm going for an imperial stout, if I'm making an imperial brown ale, something like that, porter, I could definitely see the toasted oats contributing that added layer of flavor that could be really desirable, really nice.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's room for it. I think it's a cool practice. I would love to, again, like I'm planning on at some point doing the toasted oats fresh versus toasted oats in a bag for 3 weeks thing.
Yeah.
But and again, I'll probably store those all in a bag for 3 weeks and then toast them day of and eliminate a variable. But definitely, I think there's room for it. I'm not like super enthused by it all.
Right.
And it was another step I had to do. So I probably won't do it too frequently if I'm being honest, but I think there's room for it.
Yeah. Yeah. We got a lot of reader comments on this one. And in fact, it kind of brought out some questions that I'm not even sure we have the answers to, but we're going to go through them anyways. First one comes from reader Brendan. He says, what about the flaking process causes enzyme denaturation? Denaturation. Are they doing more than just flattening the oat kernel?
That's a good question, Brandon.
I don't know the answer to that.
No, frankly, I don't know I don't know. I don't know nearly enough about the process, unfortunately. I wish I could provide a better answer for that. And actually, I will commit to doing some research on it, but yeah, off the cuff, I unfortunately can't answer that one.
Yeah, I'm certainly no flaking expert either, but my understanding again is it the denaturing of the enzyme that the flaking process does? My understanding, and maybe that is, and I'm just my ability to talk about it just isn't very good. I don't know. The next comment comes from C Law. He says, "What's the reason for leaving the oats to sit for 3 weeks? In baking, I normally use them right away." Go ahead, Matt. We kind of touched on this a bit.
Yeah, we talked about this, but just to reiterate, it's essentially that during the baking, and again, like you'll smell it if you make oatmeal cookies. Mm-hmm. There is that kind of acrid smell, like that kind of oil-like smell. And the idea is that those volatile oils will dissipate over time if you let them sit in that paper bag for 3 weeks, right? That you're able to not have those pass on to contribute anything to the beer. And that's the reason. Now, in terms of baking, I've actually... I know people who do actually pick up that oil character in freshly made oatmeal cookies. Huh. And I do think it still is present. Now, whether or not I think they probably have a chance to dissipate. And that's an experiment I want to see done, but that would be the reasoning behind it. And I wanted to make sure that wasn't a problem for this experiment. No,
of course not. You follow the norm, and
exactly.
I will say the paper bag thing, when I was talking with Derek about his method for toasting oats, his thing was you got to use a paper bag. You can't just throw them back in, like a plastic bag or something like that.
Yeah.
And the two reasons that I was told for this was, one, the paper bag will absorb those oils. And sure enough, when I did it, there were tiny little spots on the paper bag that you could see, little grease spots. And it wasn't huge, it wasn't crazy, but they were there. But then the other idea is that paper bags are somewhat breathable. And so you're not going to lock in any moisture that and have those flaked oats potentially get soft or anything like that. The paper bag really is essential, is what I was told. I see no reason not to use a paper bag. But that's on top of letting them sit for 3 weeks. You don't want to leave them tied up in a plastic bag, is what I was told. So,
yeah.
Next comment comes from Eric Branchard, who says, "Thanks for another great experiment." You're welcome, Eric. Appreciate your support. He says, "I brew an oatmeal brown ale that is similar to this one as one of my house beers a couple times a year. I haven't tried toasting my oats, but I'll probably give it a try this fall when I brew it with some vanilla. I'm glad it's worth the effort." Ooh, a vanilla oat brown ale. That actually sounds really nice for an autumn beer.
Yeah, that does sound good. I definitely think that, again, like I would be interesting to see how the vanilla plays with it. The only thing I'll hook on to in the comment is I'm looking forward to knowing, like, Eric, reach out, let me know if it was worth it for you. Like, that's kind of the thing, is like, I don't necessarily want to say that it was worth it, because I didn't prefer it in this brown ale for sure. Now, whether or not it has an impact, I think this is at least some evidence, like one piece of evidence in this one beer and all that good stuff, that there is potentially a beer contribution from toasting of oats.
Yeah.
And I hope that you prefer it. But definitely, I wouldn't take any experiment result where there is a difference found, like from our method, that it means one method is better or worse than another. So let me know how it went, man. And vanilla sounds like a great idea. It's a cool plan.
Yeah. Now I'm thinking about this beer that Eric, maybe he's brewed it already. I don't know, but
I would imagine so. It's been a while.
It's been a bit. But I'm thinking, like, what would I do if I were to be adding vanilla and using toasted oats? I'd probably go with 18 to 20% toasted oats. And in terms of other grains, I'm not going to go terribly roasty. It's a brown ale, obviously. Probably do some like pale chocolate to add a nutty thing to it. Get some regular chocolate malt blended in there. And then I think for me, I'm thinking, again, all I'm doing is thinking back to that English mild. For me, the flavor that I got from the toasted oats, it's not something that I think would work very well with, modern American or New World hops. Nothing fruity, but something almost like a noble hop, like a spicy character, maybe a touch of floral, but that spicy, earthy thing, maybe some fuggle. That actually sounds like it could work out pretty well. I'm excited. Hopefully Eric still listens to the show and can tell us if he brewed this or not.
Yeah, I definitely think so too. Yeah. I honestly, now you've got me thinking, like, what would you do with it? Personally, I would, I don't know that I would. I think personally, like, yeah, pale chocolate stands out. Like, I really like pale chocolate and like a really small amount of vanilla. I like vanilla, like salt. Like, I don't like to just taste vanilla straight up in a beer. I like hints of vanilla.
Yes.
So it'd be cool to see like, how that ends up becoming like a kind of its own unique beer. Like, that'd be really cool to taste.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Next comment comes from Resilient Cat. I'm going to go ahead and say that that's probably not the person's real name. I feel like that toasty cookie flavor sounds like it would be absolutely beautiful in a milk stout, maybe with some raisins as well. Is that too much? Hey, listen, I don't see. So the way that my brain works when it comes to adding flavors to beer is if you can get it from one of the four main ingredients, so water, malt, hops, and yeast, then there's no reason to add it, regularly. So to me, Special B is raisins. If you use like 3% Special B in a beer, you're going to get raisin character. At least that's what I get. Pruny kind of raisin character. Is that too much? I don't think so, Resilient Cat. To me, that toasty cookie flavor certainly does sound like it would pair well with a milk stout. And maybe just toss in 2-3% Special B and see how it goes.
I was actually going to say earlier, I do think when I do like vanilla, typically is with lactose. I think like just a little bit of vanilla and a little bit of lactose in milk stout ends up being really good.
Yeah.
So that actually sounds like a good plan. Like if I were to do this again, that would be a good way to try it, is like do a milk stout with a little bit of lactose, a little bit of vanilla, and do toasted oats and just see how that goes.
Yeah.
That would be a fantastic.
Yeah. Ooh, I want some right meow. Resilient cat.
You should be ashamed. Way too much. Is that in your notes? Is that in your notes for this episode that you're going to make that comment?
No, I promise that was off the cuff there. I just love Super Troopers.
I don't believe it. Fine.
I know you. All right. Final comment comes from Diego Estevez. He says, I recently brewed a cream ale with a vanilla infusion and some extra hops to balance the sweetness from the vanilla. The cookie-like flavor you mentioned actually sounds like an interesting addition to this beer's character, although the color might not be one of a cream ale anymore. I actually don't think it would change the color too much, Diego. And also, just do note that so far we've had 3 comments that are all, when in speaking of toasted oats, are talking about adding it along with other stuff, adulterants, if you will, to bring out certain sweeter cookie-like characteristics of beer. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, I think it's one of those things like where we start to like tweak and like mess with adjuncts a little bit more. And I get that. Like that makes total sense. A cream ale bit is interesting. Like I would actually really like to try a cream ale with like a really high percentage of flaked oats, or like I really want to. I've been meaning to make like a lager with a really high percentage of flaked oats, or oat malt, just to like kind of play around and see what the contribution is. But I think all these comments we've had recently are kind of spot on. Like I think a little bit of vanilla would be pleasant. Definitely like the toasting oat character. I think there's a lot of room to experiment with it.
Yeah, the curious part of me would love to taste a beer that's made with 20% toasted oats and then just Pilsner malt. That would be that could be potentially really good. I did hear recently, maybe it was what brewery was it? I think on the East Coast made a oatmeal Pilsner or something like that. And that sounded really interesting.
Sounds delicious. Yeah.
And the reviews on it that I was reading, I think it was on Facebook, sounds like people really enjoy it. So there's a lot that can be done with oats. I made what I thought was a really good kettle soured Berliner Weiss that didn't use wheat. I used flaked oats instead. And I'm telling you, you got that kind of thicker mouthfeel for a low ABV beer. I thought it paired really well with it. And they weren't toasted oats, but it did add this unique, different characteristic to the beer that people found to be quite pleasant. So if you're into toasting, or if you're into oatmeal in general, toast some up, see what how it works, and maybe you'll get away with creating a new style for yourself that you end up loving. But for now, I think that about covers it for toasted oats and brewing. Matt, is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
No, I think this covers everything. It was a really fun experiment. I think there's room to explore it as we move forward. But yeah, I'm happy to have put this one back on the shelf for future love.
Yeah. Fascinating experiment and fascinating results, in my opinion. You can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brewlosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me. Looking for a new career? Welcome to Do HVAC Training Service Center in North Charleston. Enroll today in our comprehensive HVAC training hands-on field experience-based program, covering troubleshooting, maintenance, installation, and more on various HVAC systems and ductwork. We offer EPA and NAEP preparation and testing, along with various certifications. Enjoy payment options. Achieve certification in under 5 months. Enroll now for your new journey of skill development and career advancement. Log on to dewhvactrainingsc.com to inquire.